Well, good morning again. As we start out today, I want, especially because we've been talking about prayer during Lent, I want us to start with a time of prayer, and a special kind of prayer. I think we've done this once before, maybe in the fall, a method of prayer called Ignatian method. And what you do is essentially, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. Don't fall asleep. I have a palm branch. I'll tickle your ear if you fall asleep. But close your eyes, and we're going to walk through the story of Palm Sunday in a way to, and what you do during Ignatian method is you kind of try to imagine that story as if you're watching a movie on the inside of your eyelids, or as if maybe you're even one of the characters of it. And to try to think of the sensory things that you might experience, or the emotions that you might be feeling, what you taste or smell, or if you're angry or happy or whatever it is. So now let's go ahead and close our eyes if you haven't already. And let's step into the two scenes of the Palm Sunday story. And so first, let's bring ourselves to that road to Jerusalem. And the disciples and Jesus are getting close to Jerusalem. Maybe you can even just see it just peeking out over the hill. And as you do, imagine what it would be like for Jesus to send you as one of the disciples and say, go to that village that you see over there and get something for me to ride into town. Get a donkey or some kind of pack animal. I guess he says a donkey. What does that village look like as you're walking into it? What are the smells that you smell? What are the sounds that you hear? Imagine what the voice of the owner of that donkey sounds like as he or she protests as you just sort of untie it from his door. How does it feel to be doing something like that, taking something without asking because Jesus told you to do it? What does the donkey look like? Enjoy that moment for just an instant. But very quickly, let's move on to the next scene where you are walking into the streets of and through the gate of Jerusalem, into that city. What does it look like? What does it sound like? What do the crowds look like? Can you hear people cheering and maybe even a few jeering as Jesus enters? Can you see the religious elites standing off in the distance? Can you taste the grit in your teeth from the dust that this big crowd stirs up in a dusty city in the Near East? What do you feel? Is there hope? Is there anxiety? It's not just Jesus walking into town that day. Romans coming in too. Is there expectation or fear? Can you hear people's joyful hymns? Singing and hoping that Jesus will deliver the people from all the things that are wrong. Now, in this last moment, whatever you've been experiencing, ask God to just tell you something through it. A feeling, an emotion, an observation, maybe a call to action. What is God telling you? Give thanks to God for that, and when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Because now we'll learn who's still asleep, or who fell asleep. We'll get the palm branches out. I like to imagine that scene, especially using this way of doing prayer. I really like to imagine that scene and what the crowds would have been like, and people celebrating and looking to Jesus with hope. And to set the stage for it, you first have to understand the backdrop against which, the backdrop that all of this story is happening against, because it's the week of Passover. And these are people living in a city that is under the domination of someone else, and they are celebrating this Passover celebration. And if you remember the story from Exodus, Passover is the first time in history where God showed that God hears the cry of people who are oppressed. God hears the cries of captives and he sets them free. That's the whole point of Passover, is God hears that and God acts. And now the people of Jerusalem are oppressed again. It's happened again. And they're wondering, what will God do this time? And Jesus is coming and is leading this procession on the east side of Jerusalem, entering in from Bethphage and Bethany. That's what's happening on the east side. There's tension because, meanwhile, very likely, this isn't in the text, but we know from the circumstances. Meanwhile, as Jesus is entering into the east side of the city, it's fair to assume there very well may be entering from the west side of the city another parade. And it might have just on its surface looked very similar, but it was very, very different. And even on the eastern side where Jesus is entering Jerusalem, they might have heard a low, ominous hum, or the pounding of drums, or maybe even the blare of trumpets. Because another person was entering Jerusalem from the west, and that was Pontius Pilate, who was coming up the mountain road from the coastal city of Caesarea, where he was headquartered, and was entering Jerusalem also because Passover was coming. And he was leading legion upon legion of the Roman army, Roman troops, into Jerusalem that day. And if Jesus' mission was peace, Pilate would have said that that was his mission too. And let me just tell you, if you like peace and security, I'm just here to tell you that the Romans they would have been your people, because they loved peace and security. They loved it so much, they brought it everywhere they went. They brought it at the end of a spear, but they brought it. And so something's happening on the east side of Jerusalem, something's happening on the west side of Jerusalem. They're actually, maybe by accident, marching right towards each other. A collision is about to happen in the week ahead. Pontius Pilate, on the eve of Passover, knows that it's a celebration of liberation, and he's not about to let that happen. And so he's bringing these legions of troops so that there would be peace. His version of peace, the Roman version of peace. The Romans were powerful, and they also knew how to run an empire, and this is how you kept things nice and orderly. This sets up this situation where all of this is happening. Pilate is clamping down. Jesus, what he is doing would have been like pouring gas on the fire of this yearning for liberation. And stuck in the middle is the crowd. There's Jesus announcing that God's kingdom is here, and Pilate doing the opposite. And so this is easy when I think about the crowds, because one of the questions I very often have about the crowds is, how is Jesus so popular on Sunday and no one wants to have anything to do with him by Thursday night? How does that happen? I mean, that's a reversal right there. But it's easy to see why this happens, because the crowds that are around Jesus, they would have all said that they were Jesus fans, and this are fans of Jesus. This shows the difference between fans and followers of Jesus. The fans will be there to cheer him on. How many of y'all were cheering the Lobos Friday night as fans? I was too, and I'm an Aggie, okay? But I'll cheer them on if they're playing Clemson. I'm a fan of the Lobos. I'm not a follower. And so when they lost, I was, life goes on. These people were fans of Jesus. But we know by midway through the week, the fans have melted away, and there aren't that many followers. All the Judeans know is that they hate the Romans. And they hope that Jesus is going to do something about that, so it's easy to be a fan of Jesus. Being a follower involves taking up your cross and denying yourself, pouring yourself out. So we go back, the Romans likely marching into the city on Palm Sunday too, and if they were, then Jesus is, as he is marching in, he's making a courageous counter statement that day. What's happening is it's not just people walking into the city on either side, two gospels are walking into the city on either side. One of them a gospel of power, one of them a gospel of love. Which one's going to win out? They won't coexist together. One of them will have to. You even see this in the little details. You know, Jesus, what does he ride in on? A donkey? I mean, that's lame. I love, by the way that Matthew puts it. We read the Mark version where they go and find this young colt, this young donkey. Matthew says it slightly differently. He says that when the disciples went into the village, they found a mother and a mother donkey, and laying beside her was a young colt. And it says Jesus rode them into the city, which creates an interesting visual problem. Is Jesus like just unusually flexible? He can really straddle both animals at the same time? I don't think that's what it is. If you think about it, what I think probably it was is he was probably riding the mother while the colt was still nursing if it was young enough. That's a visual right there. I mean, if you're Jesus, you're not trying to project power doing that. That's definitely not the image you're going to send. It would be ridiculous. Pilate would not make that mistake. Pilate would have been proudly riding into the city on a war stallion. There's a message right there. So Pilate is the one projecting power. Jesus, even the animals in the story show that he isn't projecting power, he's projecting faith. Faith in what God's doing. Faith in something bigger than power. It's an incredible act of faith that Jesus does as he walks in. And he's not there to conquer. He's not there to plant his foot on the neck of whoever would oppose him. He is, that's what the other peacekeeper is going to do. Jesus is there to nourish and feed faith just as a mother donkey would nourish and feed its young colt, its young foal. So the Romans enter with weapons and an edict to just keep the rabble-rousing to a minimum. Jesus enters, his weapons are compassion and mercy. I love what Pope Francis said a few years back, that God's way of combating evil in the world is to use mercy. Mercy is God's weapon. Fight evil with mercy. Is it possible to do that? Once again, we'll find out this week. There's this man, his name is Kouri Lassen. And he grew up in really hard circumstances, grew up in Estonia, had to flee because of the brutality of the Nazis. And then after the Nazis, the brutality of the communists. And he and his family, when he was a child, they were able to get out and immigrate to Australia. And there he founded this organization called Adbusters that, if you're not familiar with it, what they do are events that try to call us away from the gospel of consumerism and consumption. And so if you've ever heard of TV Turnoff Week or International Buy Nothing Day, the most un-American of all holidays, that's all from Adbusters. And back in the 70s, as he was getting started with all of this, he did this little experiment. He was in Japan, and he was in Tokyo. If you think about Japan in the 70s, this was a time of extraordinary economic growth. People were getting wealthy, industry was rising, people were moving up. And Kouri Lassen went through the streets of Tokyo with a crucifix, and he would show it to people and say, this is an image of what God is like. And you know what people said when he showed them the crucifix? He said, they said, this can't possibly be what God looks like. He looks like a loser. He looks like a loser. Jesus is going to look like a loser this week. In Maundy Thursday, Good Friday. This parade that we see at Palm Sunday, this is the high point before there's some real low points. He's going to look like a loser as everything crashes down. And here's the part I don't like thinking about, and you're not going to like to hear it, but it's the truth. Jesus looks like a loser because Jesus looks like us. Jesus looks like a loser because Jesus looks like us. You know, we're always losing stuff all the time, and it's terrifying. We know that we can lose family members or a job or the feeling of security, or we can lose a sense of innocence, or maybe we feel like we're losing track of time, which is kind of what happens when we age, is we feel like time is slipping away. The fact is, we're just all a bunch of losers. That's my sermon today. So Jesus comes in, not as a conqueror, not as a winner. Isn't it great that Jesus comes in as a loser? I mean, we take everything from him this week. We conquered Jesus, and we cheer the Romans on as they conquered Jesus. I think of that passage in Philippians chapter 2, and I can never quite remember how it goes, but it's something along the lines that, Paul is talking about this dynamic with Jesus, and he says, even though Jesus was God, he took on humility and obedience, even obedience unto death, even though he was God. And actually, I think we've mistranslated there. And the smallest, most seemingly unimportant word, because even if in Greek can also mean because. So maybe it's not because Jesus was God. Or excuse me, I said that backwards. Maybe it's not because, maybe it's not even if, I'm going to say this right sooner or later. Even though Jesus was God, he took on the form of humility. That makes it sound like he just did this temporarily, and then he went back to being a God of power that could zap people and conquer people. Maybe it's because Jesus was God. He took on the likeness of obedience, even obedience unto death. He took on humility because he was the likeness of God. If it's even though Jesus was like God, really at the end of the day what we're saying is God is Roman. For 1 week, he'll take a break and look kind of weak, but then he'll go back to being Roman after the resurrection, and he'll still conquer, and that is not who God is. God is a because Jesus is God kind of God. Because Jesus is God, he was humble. He was merciful, because God has always been merciful. There's never been a moment where God wasn't showing mercy. There's never been a moment where God wasn't compassionate. God has never been a Roman. God has never aspired to be a Roman. There's this folk singer named David Wilcox. And first of all, I just have to laugh because I don't know if y'all know this, but there's a pastor in Albuquerque named David Wilcox. And I knew I was talking about this. He comes to the fish fry every Friday, by the way. And I saw him at the fish fry a few weeks ago, and I was like, hey, David, is there any chance that you might be moonlighting at night on the side as a celebrated singer-songwriter with hundreds of thousands of albums sold? And it turns out, no, they're two different people. But he got a kick out. Actually, he was familiar with him. I guess he met him once. But singer-songwriter David Wilcox, he has this song, and I'm not going to sing it for you because you don't need that kind of negativity in your life, but I will tell you what it says. He sings, "You say you see no hope. You see no reason we should dream that the world wouldn't change, that love is foolish to believe, because there will always be some crazy with an army or a knife to wake you from your daydream, put fear back in your life. Look, if someone wrote a play to glorify what's stronger than hate, would they not arrange the stage to look as if the hero came too late? He's almost in defeat. It's looking like the evil side will win, so on the edge of every seat, it looks like we're all alone, with the evil set in shadows. But it's love that stacked the stones. It's love that set the stage. It's love that wrote the play. And even in this darkness, love can show the way. Even in this darkness, love can show the way. So Palm Sunday sets in motion these events that we will remember this week. It's the stage, but love wrote the play. Jesus' life, his work, it's an act of incredible faith. It's an act of prayer. And so where I want us to finish the season of Lent is just right there, and to pray our way through the week as we've been doing through the season of Lent. And this isn't just about coming to the Maundy Thursday or Good Friday services, although you should come to the Maundy Thursday and Good Friday services. I'm kidding, but it's a time of prayer. Let us pray our way through this week so that we'll know the difference between the love of power and the power of love. And we'll emerge with a sense of calling to do God's will just like Jesus did. Because God's mercy wrote the play, because Jesus was God, and so, of course, love would show the way. So let's pray. I didn't mean that to rhyme, but let's still pray. Gracious God, you have set the stage. You have written the story through which love would unfold. And we're thankful for that. We wouldn't have written it this way, and it's better. Amen.